Welcome to Narrative Live on a Tuesday evening. It's so good to be with you tonight. We have two fantastic people to help us through our continuing investigation into January the 6th. As tonight we look at the stack, the Oath Keepers conspiracy. Scott Macfarlane is here. Scott's from NBC4 in Washington, D.C. How are you, Scott? Nice to have you with us tonight.
Good to be here, Zach.
Thanks for being here. And Joe Dempsey is here. The researcher has been helping us a lot on our coverage here on January the 6th. He's got probably an encyclopedic knowledge of everything that happened on January the 6th, according to the indictments. It's good to have you here, Joe.
Thanks, Jeff. Nice to see you.
And both these gentlemen will be taking us through the indictment that is the Oath Keepers conspiracy. It's gripping stuff. We have some audio you'll love to hear, and all of that is coming up in just a few minutes. But first, it's time for the news and the starting block. In the news today, it's day 2 of the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, and there was more testimony from Jeffrey Epstein's former pilot, Larry Vysotsky. Vysotsky says he never saw any sexual activity on Epstein's planes, but he also says the cockpit doors always stayed closed. Epstein's planes, often dubbed Lolita's Express, have long been a source of public speculation. The names of some high-profile passengers came up under cross-examination today as well. A lawyer for Maxwell asked Vysotsky if he remembered flying pretty important people, naming former President Bill Clinton, former President Donald J. Trump, Prince Andrew, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and the actor Kevin Spacey. Vysotsky said that he remembered traveling all of them but Mr. Kennedy, and that he did not recall whether he ever flew Mr. Trump's family. In the coming weeks, jurors are expected to hear testimony from 4 women who prosecutors said were abused as teenagers by Epstein and Maxwell. Maxwell faces 6 counts. Vysotsky testified that Maxwell oversaw Epstein's households. Questioned about her relationship with Epstein, he said, "I thought it was more personal than business." The pair remained close into the 2000s. Vysotsky said they were not necessarily romantic, but were couplish. He said he did not see them holding hands or kissing. Vysotsky said that Maxwell was number 2 in Epstein's hierarchy, with Epstein being number 1. "She was the one who handled most of the finance, my expenses in the office," he said. Former Trump Chief of Staff Mark Meadows has become the first high-profile Trump insider to cooperate with the January 6th committee. Meadows has been engaging with the Select Committee through his attorneys, according to Commission Chair Benny Thompson, who released a statement today. In that statement, he said he has produced records to the committee and will soon appear for an initial deposition. Meanwhile, The Guardian reports that hours before the deadly attack on the U.S. Capitol, Donald Trump made several calls from the White House to top lieutenants who were basing themselves at the Willard Hotel in Washington, D.C. Trump made multiple calls to 2 teens at the Willard Hotel on the night of January the 5th. Details are unknown, but Trump used the calls to direct each team while discussing his failed attempt to bring Mike Pence on board his plan. We'll have much more coming up on January the 6th in our next segment. Jack Dorsey's ouster from Twitter has raised the specter of possible wide-scale censorship of the left-leaning voices on Twitter. Jack, as he's known on Twitter, was ousted by Trump ally Paul Singer's Elliott Management. The hedge fund magnate is known for his high-profile and often combative deal-making. Singer frequently donates to Jewish and pro-Israel causes, including Hillel and BBYO. He also supports LGBTQ rights because his son is gay. But make no mistake about it, Singer is a Republican, and Elliott Management is a top source of contribution to the National Republican Senatorial Committee. Jack Dorsey's ouster coincided with the unusual suspension today of Jim Stewartson's account. Jim is a frequent guest of Narratives, and he's a critic of none other than Michael Flynn. However, Twitter came to sane, rational thinking today and reinstated Stewartson's account late this afternoon. We welcome back Jim Stewardson to Twitter. Twitter did also unveil a new privacy policy, which it claims will protect users, but could just as easily be used as a backdoor way to silence left-leaning voices. We'll be watching that development quite closely. Up next on Narrative, we continue our investigation into January the 6th as we take a deep look at the conspiracy of the Oath Keepers. We're calling it the Stack. Scott Macfarlane is with us next. He's here from NBC4. Nice to have you here, Scott. And Joe Dempsey's here. Boy, when I look at all of that happened on January the 6th, and we certainly have learned a lot of new information, especially recently with the new information about what was going on in the Willard. There seems to be a lot less attention being paid to what's actually happened in the courts, about the indictments, about all the action that really went on the ground, because we're also focused on the politics and the legalese. But there is so much that happened on the ground that day. And I think the Oath Keepers indictment, the group of people that formed that stack that everyone will remember, this group of military personnel, or dressed in military fatigue at least, all with hands on each other's shoulders, forming a long queue, who were climbing up the steps of the Capitol and also leaving the ellipse. People will remember those images quite well. We're going to focus on their indictment tonight because it's such an interesting one. And before we went on the air, Scott, you were telling us why you think it's so important.
Well, we have nearly 700 federal criminal defendants at this point, but those accused oath keepers really are the tip of the spear for a couple of reasons. First of all, they face among the most serious charges. They're accused of conspiracy, of plotting, planning, being ready for action January 6th. What's more, they're accused of coordinating on site using what the feds call that military stack. But what's most provocative, Zeb, is we've had a number of these accused oath keepers who flipped, who've agreed to plead guilty and agreed to cooperate. And it's been months in some cases, and none of them has gone to sentencing, which leads us to believe they're still cooperating.
They're still cooperating. Of course, it's very tantalizing because we know, as in our reporting here on Narrative, that amongst the people who were there on January the 6th in the morning with Roger Stone, we know that the Oath Keepers were there that day. There's video of that morning, surrounded by many Oath Keepers. So it's kind of tantalizing to think what a flipped Oath Keeper could tell everyone or the police about what Roger Stone was doing or Rudy Giuliani was doing, because they were all staying at the Willard Hotel. And we now know that Donald Trump was in regular contact with them. So it is tantalizing to think that, there they were on the morning of January the 6th. They're also named in the indictments, a few of them.
Yeah, and that's the thing that's really so striking. These are top-level defendants so far in the U.S. Capitol riot prosecution, the largest prosecution in American history, and some of them have flipped. You have top-line defendants flipping. Mm-hmm. Who are they flipping on? What are they offering up? Who are they offering up? That's why this is the epicenter of the prosecution right now.
And Scott, when you say they're flipping, what's interesting about that, it means that they're pleading guilty. They're literally taking charges. So I think Caleb Berry was a member of the stack, and he pled guilty to one count of conspiracy. He also pled guilty to obstruction of an official proceeding. Those charges carry, minimum sentences. So there's 5 years minimum sentences for some of these charges, and up to 20 years for some of these charges. So these are not, they're pleading guilty. So some pretty serious charges.
Yeah, and they're taking a federal guilty plea, which, for all indications, is you're going to go to prison based on this guilty plea, and they're offering something up in return. That they were among the first to plead guilty of all defendants is also quite telling, indicating they're a priority of the U.S. Justice Department, and that the Justice Department is trying to show progress to the American public, something the American public very much craves and feel is in short supply.
And the fact that we're talking about the 5th superseding indictment, and there's still unnamed defendants that are in there. So there's people like Person 11 that we don't know. That's going to come in a 6th superseding indictment.
Right. So we're still learning a lot of information there. Going back to the Willard, so we have Roger Stone and others staying there. We, of course, remember the Manhattan Madam who told everyone that she was just hanging out with Roger Stone alone in the room. Nothing else to be seen there. But we know that these Oath Keepers were with Roger Stone a lot of that weekend, and 2 in particular get named in this indictment. This guy, Hydro, Joshua James. Can you tell us a little bit more about who Hydro is?
Sure. So Hydro was one of the people who was guarding Roger Stone along with Robert Menuda. And they were in, as you saw in that picture, they were in the golf carts that were put together by the 80% Coalition.
Right.
So he's pretty close to the action here. He started with Roger Stone in the morning. So we saw that outside the Willard. But he also was one of the people who took one of the golf carts and rushed to the Capitol through a crowd of people. He and Menuda were taking these golf carts and just kind of flying through after a lot of things had already happened at the Capitol. So he kind of came in a bit of a second wave.
Right. There is this shot here of Robert Menudo. You see him there on the right where he's like, he's pretty angry. This is as the things were going pretty awry at the Capitol, and he was trying to get people to get his people out. So he'd arrived. He was yelling and screaming a bunch of things at a lot of people. The picture on the left is from him earlier in the day, but we know that both people are him. And when he's yelling and screaming there on the right, this is what he's saying. Patriots are storming the Capitol building. There's violence against patriots by the D.C. police. So we're en route in Grand Theft Auto golf carts. That's on the way there, obviously, to the Capitol building right now. It's going down, guys. It's literally going down right now. Patriots storming the Capitol building. Fucking war in the streets right now. Word is they got in the building. Let's go. So, this was a pretty amped up event as these guys were beginning to storm the Capitol on that day, Scott.
Yeah, and you talk about Joshua James as being part of that group from small town Alabama, among those who has not pleaded guilty. So his case remains out there in the open. And his attorney and the other defense attorneys in the Oath Keepers case, Seb, have asked the judge and the prosecutors, when are we going to get about starting this trial? Give us a firm trial date. We got to move forward. We want to move forward, in part because some of our co-defendants are in pretrial detention and quite urgently looking to move forward. And here's the thing. They're trying to pin the prosecutors down on, is there going to be another superseding indictment? Is there going to be another delay, another cause to push this back? And the feds haven't committed either way. So it raises the prospect, as was discussed earlier, there could be another superseding indictment coming with more allegations, more defendants, making this case even bigger.
Let's talk a little bit about the stack, because it's a term that we now recognize as being a military thing. But why is it so important to these indictments that there was a stack of people involved? What is it telling prosecutors?
Prosecutors are communicating this deliberately and notoriously. They're arguing there was a military stack formation used by some number of the accused Oath Keepers to gain entry to breach security. And I'm reading the verbatim now from one of the court filings from the prosecutors. They say these individuals who are wearing helmets, reinforced vests, and clothing with Oath Keeper logos and insignia can be seen moving in an organized and practiced fashion and forcing their way to the front of the crowd. Organized and practiced, a component you'd like to communicate if you're trying to charge somebody with conspiracy. But the defendants are kicking back at this use of the phrase military stack. In fact, in the last 72 hours, one of the defendants, a man named Kenneth Harrelson, has responded saying the use of the word stack is invalid because military stacks refer, in his words, without exception, to members of the armed forces who are carrying semi-automatic weapons, and then uses this analogy saying many people move in stacks at a rock concert to get to the front of the line. School children, they argue, move in stacks to go from class to class. They think that phrase is loaded and being used deliberately, and they say invalidly by the prosecutor.
I mean, it's a little bit of a stretch because we know as well that they were planning this for a long period of time. They didn't just arrive on January the 6th and form this stack. They had planned this along with all their other training and planning. The indictments are quite clear about how much training and planning they did. It goes back all the way, I think, to November, if I'm not mistaken, that right after the elections, that they were already starting to plan for, what would be the Stop the Steal event many, many months later.
There were communications in Jessica Watkins' texts about recruits and talking about what the training was that they were undertaking.
Right.
In some of these conspiracy cases, including the one with Jessica Watkins and the Oath Keepers, the feds are alleging plotting and planning in advance of January 6th. With the accused 3 percenters group, they're alleging some type of planning as early as November, right after the election. But what's happening here is important. In this case, they're alleging conspiring and conspiracy on the ground as well. That's why they're specifying military stack and on-site coordination. They'd like to, I think, be able to argue conspiracy in the hours just before and at the start of the U.S. Capitol riot, not just in the days and weeks in advance.
Right. Let's look at one of these pages. I think it's from the same indictment. And correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm reading from the wrong one, because I can't see it as clearly as you might. But on November 9th, 2020, Watkins, the self-described commanding officer of the Ohio State Regular Militia, sent text messages to recruit a number of individuals who had expressed interest in joining the Ohio State Regular Militia. In these messages, Watkins mentioned, among other things, that the militia had a week-long basic training class coming up in the beginning of January, and told one recruit, I need you fighting fit by inauguration. In describing the program to Person 10, Watkins said it's a military-style basic here in Ohio with Marine drill sergeant running it, an hour north of Columbus, Ohio. I mean, boy, that seems like a lot of premeditated planning and training ahead of time.
There's always been this interesting component that Joe and I suppose both noticed, that one of the unique characteristics of the Oath Keepers case is not just that there's former military being charged, but that's important. It's that they're accused of readying that QRF, that quick reaction force, staging firearms at a hotel in Ballston, Virginia, right over the city limits of D.C. and Virginia. That component of conspiracy, it's not to be overlooked, because that's a readying of arms in case Donald Trump invoked the Insurrection Act, according to prosecutors. That's a distinctive component of the Oath Keepers case, and why I always circle in permanent magic marker every court appearance of every accused Oath Keeper, because it just is the heart of this prosecution.
Yeah. Let's underline that for people, if we can, just before you jump in there, Joe, how important it is to know that these guys planned a a series of events. It wasn't just the one storming of the Capitol. It was an event that stormed the Capitol. They were anticipating a response, either from Donald Trump or from the military or something. And then they had this quick reaction force ready to go in again. They were planning for battle. They weren't just planning to arrive once and occupy the Capitol. They were planning for something far more serious.
This particular indictment takes any argument about this not being an armed insurrection and completely eradicates it. Mm-hmm. They were told, and you can see it right in the indictment, person one, Stewart Rhodes, was talking about, I want people also left outside the Capitol and fully armed and ready to go if the Insurrection Act is called. So that quick reaction force where they were kind of, like you said, having this sort of armory in this hotel. There's conspiracy also along the lines of who person three is, because in earlier indictments, person three was speaking with people from North Carolina in some of the buses that were coming up from North Carolina. So this doesn't just go with the Oath Keepers that we know. There's a lot of Oath Keepers that we don't know. And these indictments are actually telling the story.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about Stewart Rhodes. I mean, he's the founder of the Oath Keepers, and the Oath Keepers was designed to sort of recruit a bunch of former military people, probably people who are, maybe unhappy with the way things had gone in the various wars that America had been involved in. But they had no real other classification for people they wanted. They just were looking for former military people. Stewart Rhodes comes from an interesting history. He used to work for Ron Paul, as we've discussed on this show many times. But, he's a politician. He's really not a militia leader. He's sort of organized for politics, and he's been doing this for years. It leads one to believe that a lot of this was sort of preordained or preconceived of many years ago, many years before the insurrection took place, that people were already thinking about how do we get armed militias involved in the political scene in the United States.
We laugh all the time because of Infrastructure Week. There was a lot of infrastructure that went into this, so a lot of planning over a long time.
Yeah, I haven't done personal reporting on Stewart Rhodes, but the dynamic you described to have, Zev, these extremist groups, these far-right groups, necessarily recruit military, and not just because they're envisioning a possible, armed combat on U.S. soil, though we saw an armed combat on U.S. soil on January 6th, but because there's this belief, perhaps well-grounded, that military recruitment really pays off for far-right groups, because military recruits are influencers in their community, in their literal community, in their proverbial community. They bring people with them because they're well thought of in their communities. So it's almost a force multiplier. You recruit a military member or a military veteran, you get a lot of bang for your buck. Others come along too. And extremist groups and far-right groups have clearly learned that. But the side benefit, I suppose, for those groups is if you are going to engage in combat and plan for combat, having military members has people who are more prepared or more understanding of strategy, of things like a stack. That said, Joe's right. This case disposes of any notion this was not an armed insurrection. You have people on January 6th accused of bringing makeshift weaponry, hockey sticks, baseball bats, flagpoles sharpened into a spear, tasers, chemical spray, hatchets, pickaxes, I can go on and on. But you also have some number of defendants, not in the Oath Keepers case, but in parallel cases, who truly had guns, according to prosecutors, on their person in the crowd. And that does include the person accused of having 11 Molotov cocktails in his pickup truck on Capitol Hill and whoever left the active pipe bombs.
Wow, that's so incredible when you list all those weapons. It's worth noting that the Oath Keepers, a lot of their origins come from Obama not being a natural born American. This was, they were part of the birther universe. And so that's why Stewart Rhodes cut his teeth along with the constitutional defenders.
The politics of this are somewhat fluid. You obviously have a great number of people who were there January 6th, according to prosecutors, in vocal defense of Donald Trump. When you get further into some of these cases, though, you see either a defense that's arguing they don't buy the big lie, at least not anymore, or they were there and didn't vote in the election, or they were there because of other motivations. But you also have the ongoing denialism of the 2020 elections, the politics of this moment, the transcendent politics that exists today, complicating matters for defendants. You've seen judges or prosecutors argue that because of the constant Donald Trump denialism of 2020, that some of these defendants might be too much of a danger to release from pretrial detention or to release from restrictive pretrial restrictions. So it's not irrelevant what Donald Trump says.
And it's true that a lot of people in in this conspiracy indicted are still in jail. A lot of them, including Watkins, the woman that we've famously seen as in that stack photo. I mean, there's a lot of people that are still behind bars.
That's why there's so many court filings, because some of these defendants are trying to get out of jail. Right. Prosecutors are arguing to hold them. So that's why we have this back and forth. Right. It's illuminating to the cases, but that's why we know so much.
Well, it's December, right? These guys have been in jail for a while now.
11 months. And that's also not irrelevant. That's part of the argument they're making to get out, that they've been in there long enough. As of tonight, Zev and Joe, 41 January 6th defendants remain in pretrial detention in the Washington, D.C. jail.
They've probably served a lot of the time that they will ultimately get sentenced if they are found guilty. Let's listen to some of this tape, because, I mean, these guys kindly left us a lot of good evidence. I mean, they did this thing on Zello, which is a sort of a group chat thing. And in there, they would recorded the entire experience of them approaching the Capitol on January the 6th, all the way into them making it to the mezzanine level on the Capitol. Fascinating that they would do that on tape, and the place, in terms of evidence, it's quite revealing. But it just takes you into the moment. So I'm going to play a few clips of this from that Zello tape. Here's the first little bit. It runs about a minute.
Just be safe, be alert, and stay in groups.
We have a good group. We got about 30, 40 of us. We're sticking together and sticking to the plan.
We'll see you soon, Jess. Airborne.
After that, brother. Godspeed and fair winds to us.
Amen, sister. Stay safe.
To all the boots on the ground in D.C., we are praying stoutly for you that you will get to accomplish what God has put you there for. Be safe and be firm in your faith, knowing that you are there for a reason.
Amen to that.
Wait and watch. What are the numbers at the Capitol, going to the Capitol? Everybody from the Ellipse and Trump's thing is going to the Capitol? How many are, what do you guys estimate?
I think it was a 50-50 split. Half of them went straight down towards the Capitol, and the other half are going up around to the other front of the White House.
What we're seeing is that they split, that they had a plan to go as two different units, basically. One that was designed to go into the Congress, the other one was going to some other location. But it's just interesting to hear them, firstly, base everything in prayer. It reminds you how Christian and devout a lot of these people are. And then from there, we go into the separation of their two teams, one going all the way into the Capitol and the other team heading to that second location. Do we know what that second location was, or is that still unknown to us?
I think the person was misspeaking. I think when they said that half the people had gone to the Capitol, and then he said half the other people have gone to the front of the White House. I don't know if they went to the front of the White House or if they went to the other part of the Capitol. So they were on multiple sides of the Capitol. So he could have been saying that there were people going to different parts of the Capitol. But what's interesting about that particular speaker, and what somebody also said in there, you heard boots on the ground. That boots on the ground is not just a figure of speech. It's literally boots on the ground was the name of the group that were the intel folks who were literally there providing the intel that we hear on that tape, and they were actually the ones who were kind of overseeing boots on the ground. They were there in the Capitol.
Oh, so they weren't actually on a remote location. They make it seem like they're on a remote location, but there's actually all the people coordinating and giving them all this information on that channel are actually at the Capitol?
Yes, there's some folks that are there. So I listened to all of that audio. Okay, it's about 2 hours long.
Yeah,
it basically takes you through the entire day. So what we heard there was sort of the beginning, people starting to get ready and that kind of thing. You hear Jessica Watkins say we've got a good group, 30 to 40 people. She's literally on her way at that point, marching to the Capitol. She's a few blocks out at that point. So she's on the ground and she's relaying information. Now that information went into another sort of relay. I would consider it like a relay group, because there's folks that are on that are relaying other information. They're posting things to chats, they're posting photos, they're posting links, they're taking in that intel and they're dispersing it to others. Then you have another, and you heard his voice in there too, and that's someone that we need to talk about. But you have somebody who's literally taking that intel and that information. You heard somebody ask, what are our numbers? What are the people there? That's not just somebody who's being curious. That's somebody who's a leader trying to understand, what am I seeing? What do I have in terms of my boots on the ground?
Interesting. Let's listen to another clip a little bit later on.
What percentage of the crowd is going to the Capitol?
100%. It is spread like wildfire that Pence has betrayed us, and everybody's marching on the Capitol, all million of us. It's insane. We're about 2 blocks away from it now, and police are doing nothing. They're not even trying to stop us at this point.
Yeah, Yeah, guys, police can't stop you. This is a constitutional enforcement authority, the civilian authority of we the people. Constitutional enforcement action, direct action. There is no legitimate authority in the federal government. The Congress has failed. The executive branch has failed, other than Trump. And the judicial branch has failed, Supreme Court. This is the civilian exercise of civilian power to alter and abolish this fucking tyrannical, treasonous government piece of shit and drain this fucking swamp. Fucking swamp. Yeah.
Trump's been trying to drain the swamp with a straw. We just brought a shop vac.
I mean, that's fighting talk, obviously, and angry talk, and also complete bullshit. I mean, that isn't true. They cannot go into the Congress and act like that, but they're being told by whoever that is over there that they're allowed to legally do what they're doing, which is fascinating, Scott.
I look at a deeper issue that's communicated in those radio transmissions. Prosecutors have been specific and granular with how they make arguments about the radio equipment that defendants have brought. It's not a small thing when prosecutors specify some of these defendants accused of conspiracy had earpieces to communicate, that they had a Baofeng radio to communicate. They're making this a component of the cases they're bringing, be it a conspiracy case or otherwise. So it's not insignificant when prosecutors specify that members of the Oath Keepers, this alleged group of far-right members, were waving each other, directing people. It's a component of a conspiracy case. Federal conspiracy cases are typically laborious and huge, among the hardest and slowest to bring in the federal system. They've got to make these cases, and they're arguing about the radio equipment, about the back and forth, about the nonverbal communication, and about the equipment they brought to communicate.
You know, the signs that they were using as well, very important, as you point out, because that obviously required some training as well. You'd need to know what those signs are, what they mean. So, you know, they obviously had to plan ahead in terms of understanding what the sign language was all about.
And I'm watching all these cases, all these misdemeanor cases, this first wave of cases that have gone to disposition, the low-hanging fruit, those who pleaded guilty to unlawful picketing, didn't hurt anybody, didn't assault anyone or damage anything. And almost to a person, Zev and Joe, they're arguing at sentencing when they're looking for leniency that they were caught up in the moment, that they were caught up in the frenzy and in the crowd. The prosecutors are making clear in these higher level cases, there was no caught up in the moment. There were people equipped with certain devices, with certain gear, and with certain techniques.
In the legal indictments, or in the indictments and other legal documents, that was relied upon both by the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, because they considered those that are now sort of, like you said, that low-hanging fruit, the normies, hoping that people would get caught up in the moment. These normal people who aren't Oath Keepers, they really, you know, they're just maybe there to see the speech that Trump gave, or just kind of be there for the day. They did get swept up in something. And I think that sort of, you know, crowd mentality took over. And I believe that the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers were reliant upon that crowd, that madness of crowds to take over, and the normies to begin doing things that they themselves wouldn't necessarily be held accountable for.
And also this reinforcement of this brainwashing, really, because we can't describe it anything else, because it's not true in any way that they can go and do what they were doing, but they're being told as they're doing it, hey, it's okay, go do it. Reinforces the fact that, you know, what they believed, a lot of them said, was that Donald Trump sent them there, that he legitimately sent them there because of a legitimate order from the president of the United States, all of which is true. It doesn't mean it's legal. It just means that it is, you know, they're under some sort of hierarchical structure, which was reinforcing that this needed to happen, that this was so important, and that there was almost like a military command structure that in place here to reinforce all of this. Thank you for spending your time with Narrative, and stay tuned. There's much more to this conversation in our next episode. Narrative is made possible by viewers and listeners like you who join at patreon.com/narrative. Join today and support truly independent journalism. Patreon.com/narrative. It's fascinating when you realize how many Russians there are involved in January the 6th. And it's one of the big investigations we're going to be keeping our eye on. It's not just the people who were involved in crashing through those doors on January the 6th. It's the foreign influence machine that was built around this. And when we're back in mid-August or September, assuming we raise all the funding we need, we'll be providing the biggest investigation yet. It's provided a whole new dimension of investigation into January the 6th, which you've not seen anywhere else. You've not seen that in the committee hearings, and you certainly are not going to see it in any courtroom because a lot of it is foreign espionage, and it's really fascinating. The biggest investigation that we have probably undertaken. And I got to tell you, the stuff we're finding out is sensational, and it is going to blow your mind what we discovered. It's amazing that we were covering the stuff that people are talking about now. In 2021, in March, I remember looking up Ginny Thomas. Who's Ginny Thomas? And it just tells you how far ahead narrative is of everyone else, and how this kind of detailed investigative work that we do, which I love because I'm a geek, this is the kind of stuff that you find all the truth in. If the devil is in the details, so is the truth. We've been able to uncover in the last year every aspect of January the 6th and more than you've heard just on the committee hearings or elsewhere. And that is why we need so many of you to join us in our mission to continue doing this kind of reporting. Please go to patreon.com/narrative. It's $10 a month. That's the recommended rate, but there's also a $5 rate there. We really do need the money. It's impossible to continue to produce this kind of content, and there's all sorts of costs associated with this. And in order to spend the amount of time and energy to make it worth our while, but worth everybody's while, and to make sure that all the contributors get paid and everyone gets what they need to, we absolutely do need your support. We can't continue to do this for free. It's just not feasible, although I certainly will continue to try as much as I can. So the people that have already contributed, we're so thankful to you. There's several hundred of you that have supported us and have done so from day one. I guarantee you that a lot of the details, a lot of the information that we take for granted today, people only know because you contributed those $10 to Narrative. Hopefully others will join. We do need a lot of you to please join. So if you can spare the $10 a month, I know it's a lot at these times, please consider doing so at patreon.com/narrative. We are on hiatus. I'm not meant to be here, but I couldn't resist coming on tonight just to say hello to all of you. Missed you guys a lot. And I look forward to an incredible season ahead. I can't wait to get the season started. And we look forward to having you here with us. Let's listen to another one here. This is a little shorter.
They need to slap Pelosi till she gets pretty and sober. It's going to take a lot of hits.
Well, now that they know the voice of the people has spoken and what we stand for, maybe they might wake their ass up and say, hey, let's just appease the people and give them Trump.
From what I'm hearing, they have breached the Capitol. They are inside, still fighting the police. Can we get it confirmed on that?
That is confirmed. They are inside, going through the door, front and back door, going through windows, climbing scaffolding. They are inside. Congress is being taken out of the chamber and put into secured, sheltered areas for evac.
That's revealing. I mean, they're inside, and now things are beginning to heat up. What did you make of that, Scott?
What strikes me most is just how many cases, big, small, mid-level, where Nancy Pelosi is referenced, either something vulgar or violent about or toward Nancy Pelosi. It's also not a surprise to look at the backstories of some of these defendants and see accusations, if not convictions, for misogyny, for domestic assault, for violence against women. And every time I hear it, Zev and Joe, every time I hear it, it's like, there's another one. There's another person accused of saying something violent toward Nancy Pelosi. It is a great thing. It is a wonderful thing. She was safely evacuated on January 6th.
Yeah, the hatred towards Pelosi and to Pence throughout all this tape is quite remarkable. I mean, especially because Pence was on their team, supposedly, up until that day. But it's really remarkable how much hatred they have toward the Democrats, and particularly Pelosi, as you point out.
What's more, if you look through the Oath Keepers cases, as Joe has and as I have, you'll see also vulgar phrases chanted towards Mitch McConnell, specified near, around that so-called military stack, January 6th.
I'm really interested in why there's so much vulgarity. I mean, it's sort of maybe just a military culture, but it does seem very vulgar. It seems so steeped in hatred.
It's not only vulgar in terms of the language, it's vulgar in terms of the racial overtones of a lot was alleged that day, soiled the walls on January 6th. People, drinking alcohol they found on site, people smoking cigarettes and marijuana inside this hallowed building, vulgar in lots of different levels.
Yeah, really is.
And the Confederate flag is disgusting as well. The fact that that's being paraded through and, what they've done to ransack offices, it's disgusting.
Especially and there were multiple Confederate flag images, not just the notorious one that you saw Mr. Seyfried allegedly carrying near the Senate chamber. There were others, and it wasn't a singular moment or a singular person doing that.
And the giant cross, I guess they were going to try and hang someone on the gallows or somehow as well.
So there was a small gallows that was, according to a witness, not large enough to use, and pardon that phrase, but it was more of a model gallows with a fluorescent orange rope of significant strength. And I had a couple of historians tell me the orange is not accidental. Orange makes it more bright, obvious, noticeable, a brighter symbol. We know that the noose rope itself is in the possession of the Washington field office of the FBI, far from Capitol Hill. Hasn't been referenced in any charging documents, but that the FBI has it raises the prospect it'll eventually be mentioned in somebody's case.
Fascinating. All right, let's listen to two more we got here. I think they're getting pretty close to getting inside the stacking.
We are in the mezzanine. We are in the main dome right now. We are rocking it. They're throwing grenades. They're freaking shooting people with paintballs, but we're in here.
Be safe. God bless and Godspeed, and keep going.
Get it, Jess. Do your shit. This is what we fucking lived up for. Everything we fucking trained for.
Be safe out there, brother.
I just got a news release over my phone that they've just dispersed tear gas in the Capitol Rotunda.
Who has dispersed? Because we got tear gas too, I think.
They said the tear gas was dispersed to try clearing them out, and it is not even moving any of them out of the building.
Yeah, I think they're a little pissed off right now.
Well, I guess they're going to realize now that the American patriots and the American people are not going to put up with this illegal bullshit that they're pulling and trying to get fucking Slow Joe in there.
That's quite triumphant for them, I guess. They're arriving at the mezzanine. I still don't know what the plan was. I mean, it seems to me, listening to the audio, they were going to try and hold everyone hostage for a long period of time.
Yeah, I don't know what their plan was, to just maybe occupy the space for as long as possible to sort of delay, the counting of the electoral votes. But then what were you going to do? At some point, the National Guard was going to come. At some point, you have to take the Capitol back. What were they going to do?
They were hoping, I think, for some sort of negotiation or negotiated settlement, if you listen to the audio. But then things went awry because someone died. But let's focus on that moment where she arrives at the mezzanine, Scott. That's a very, damning evidence, I guess, of this entire indictment.
This is a multi-front war on January 6th, and you're focusing on one front, a rather interesting one, where you have accused far-right group members who are accused of plotting and planning and coordinating, who got access to this hallowed place. What was supposed to happen next? This could be a component of what the feds are trying to get by flipping some members of the Oath Keepers. But that's one front. There are other fronts that included a whole lot more violence. You go to the west front of the Capitol, where you have hand-to-hand gruesome combat that led to injuries, that had a cloud of chemical spray, barbaric fighting. That's not where the accused Oath Keepers are. You've got different evidence each day. You've seen video. It seems to be a commercial loading dock with a door closing.
Right.
People getting beneath it, fighting through police, throwing trash can at police. You've got the other fronts, where you had the Capitol Police officer chemically sprayed, who would later die of natural causes of a stroke. There's that assault. There's all these different spots. On the East Front, a different group of accused far-right group members, the accused Proud Boys, one of whom allegedly smashed open the window, allowing the mob to enter. The Oath Keepers are in one spot, but as Joe sees from reading through the indictments, as I see, they're not there where that Game of Thrones style fighting was happening.
Right. But it is fascinating when you look at this timeline map that we have here, how quickly all these groups were able to surround the Capitol, a matter of minutes, really, and gain access to the building on all fronts, and how violent, and you're so right about how violent everything was on all these sides, and maybe the Oath Keepers not so violent, considering how much was going on elsewhere.
It was just a different front. What strikes me most about that map is just the closeness in time of everything.
Yeah,
it's
about
almost
19
a
minutes.
simultaneous nature to it. And I haven't seen much of an intersection in the thousands of pages of court filings between different far-right groups alleging or specifying coordination. I haven't seen that. If the feds have those cards, they may not be showing them yet. But everything does seem to just happen at once, doesn't it?
It does. It's pretty mysterious.
This robust movement from all corners.
And they all knew where they were going. I mean, it seems like they all knew where they were going because that's where they landed up and got in so quickly, some of them even having doors open from the inside. Joe, tell us a little bit more about this mezzanine moment of Watkins arriving and how important that is from your perspective.
Well, it's important because, she's basically given, the channel sort of the, hey, we're here. It's the planting of the flag. We're inside here. This is what we came to do. And we've won, right? We've completed our mission to get into the mezzanine. being in the mezzanine, they could have gone in either direction. They could have gone to the Senate. They could have gone to the House. Anything could have happened at that point. One of the things that's extremely interesting is in one of the documents that I read, I'm going to see if I can go back and find it, or maybe it was in an interview that Stewart Rhodes did at one point. He mentioned that the Oath Keepers were in there to provide medical aid. They had already been there, so they had heard that there was a shot fired. There's a mention of it on that tape. But at one point, to use the fact that they actually went into the Capitol to render medical aid is ridiculous because they, one, breached the Capitol before the shot was made, and two, never rendered any medical aid.
Right, interesting. Here's another one. Here's the fifth clip here. This is soon afterwards.
I have actually been part of taking over countries or running elections in countries, in other countries around the world, where we say, hey, be more like us, act more like us. In fact, we're going to show you how to do an election in your country, Iraq, in your country, Afghanistan, in your country, name the Central American country in the 80s and the 90s. So anyway, this is embarrassing.
No, I totally agree with you. And under the U.S. law, under the State Department, under the UN, if they're not poll watchers, if there's not, you redo the election.
Into politics because I'm a politician. I get into politics because I care about the future of the country. I saw the country going towards socialism while I was in uniform. So that's why I felt so strongly about getting involved in the political process, because I knew if we went a different direction, we wouldn't have this conversation. DNA in the American psyche and in the American culture that still exists, and that DNA goes all the way back to 1776.
Again, 1776 comes up again, but these guys, it's interesting. They're reflecting on them trying to bring order to other countries, and yet here they are creating absolute chaos in DC. I mean, it seems like they haven't really thought it through very well, or they're just so brainwashed that they're in a different dimension almost.
One of the interesting components of the Oath Keepers case that I found in their court files, but I didn't find in others, is the prosecutors allege what they call a bug-out plan, a contingency plan. If all hell breaks loose, or if all things go all to hell, they had a plan, read the court filings correctly, to go to the mountains of Kentucky or West Virginia or Western Virginia, where they'd be proof from being spotted by drones, where they'd have supplies. They had a bug-out plan. I'm not sure what would have caused a bug-out plan to be enacted if this didn't, because this didn't go too well for them.
It did not, no.
They had a contingency plan, the feds argued at one point earlier this year. Another layer of a conspiracy case is to have a bug-out plan.
Yeah.
And Kentucky is so important that you mentioned Kentucky, because earlier we talked about Stewart Rhodes working for Ron Paul. Well, his son Rand Paul, the senator from Kentucky. So to find an open arms in Kentucky is an interesting thought as well.
By the way, people here on the chat has Matt Falso saying that he believes that is Alex Jones on that tape. That sounds
It is
like
Alex
It is Alex Jones on that tape.
Yes.
Oh.
So not only is it Alex Jones, but that is Michael Flynn telling Alex Jones on January 5th during an interview that they did at the Willard. That's Mike Flynn telling Alex Jones about how he was in the 80s and 90s,
That's really interesting. So why is it included inside this? Why is it included in their Velo chat?
It's included because this was sort of towards the end of the day, as things were, they were starting to sense that things weren't going their way anymore. And they had actually, on the Zello chat, played and broadcast that message over the Zello chat to the 100 or so people that were on that Zello chat. So that's part of just an open channel on Zello that they just broadcast that particular part of the interview between Mike Flynn and Alex Jones.
But it's not necessarily
Alex Jones and I'm sorry.
Go ahead. You go ahead.
Jones and InfoWars keep coming up in these cases. We're reading through in the past week the case of a man named Daniel DJ Rodriguez from California. He's accused of using the taser device on the neck of injured DC police officer Michael Fanone. The FBI released through the U.S. attorney, and we read through the hundreds of pages of transcript of the FBI's questioning of Rodriguez, and they asked him, where do you get your beliefs and information from? And he responded, InfoWars.
Yeah.
InfoWars is my source. And we see as somebody who has made appearances on InfoWars is actually charged in a January 6th case.
Right.
It just keeps coming up, and it's one of the connective tissue. in an increasing number of cases.
Yeah, I've argued from the very beginning that he sort of operates as the Ministry of Propaganda for this whole thing for months and months. Even back early in September, before the elections, he and Stone were discussing the Insurrection Act on InfoWars. This is the first recorded event where they were talking openly about what was going on. So it's interesting that their tape is being played into this fellow chat as these people are actually being part of the insurrection. And it certainly adds questions around when Alex Jones will be indicted and if he'll ever be indicted. Certainly for not responding to the commission with subpoenas, but also when he'll be indicted for his activities leading up to that. Because Stroy, as you point out, which is the other InfoWars personality, has in fact been indicted.
Jonathan Schroyer, that's right.
Yeah, right. Joe, any other thoughts on Alex Jones there or anything else we should know about that, or should we move on to the next one?
I think we go to the next one.
This is the last one, so we are post-event. So this is after the event. She's a little tired, is Ms. Watkins.
I want to say thank you.
Maybe it's almost Watkins. Someone is.
Oh, no, thank you, 3%. Thank you, everybody. Really. Like I said, if I'm going to die in this country, I'm going to die free, along with my patriot friends. I will never consent to this presidency. I will never consent to communism. If you guys need me, I'll be here. I'll have the phone by my bedside.
Sounds pretty maudlin. Sounds pretty sad and tired, obviously, but deceived. Like seriously deceived by what was going on in the country at the time.
There's an arc to this tape because it does start out sort of exciting. We're in the mezzanine. Yay, look at us. And then you have that sort of demoralized, hey, what just happened? The voice that we just heard, I spoke earlier about this sort of, relay team. They're thanking her for providing intel. She was literally taking information off of social media, such as Sidney Powell, Lynn Wood. She was taking things that they were tweeting, talking about how Pence had betrayed them, how Pence had, failed anything. And you can tell that they're demoralized by what had happened and disillusioned.
Especially because someone had died. I mean, by that point, 2 people had died. It's interesting to me that this is what the end of the day sounds like to them. They don't feel very triumphant. They obviously felt like it was a disaster for them too. Yet they still seem somewhat committed to dying for the cause, even though it was a giant failure.
And if you talk to some of the January 6 defendants who are locked up pre-trial in the D.C. jail, or you speak with their attorneys, they'll tell you, some of them will, that what exists now among those January 6 defendants in the jail is almost cult-like. They're segregated from the rest of the general population, either for their safety, the rest of the population's safety, or both. And every night they sing the national anthem. They speak about January 6th a lot. One of the defendants says it's not a good place to go to get fresh new ideas and to try to separate yourself from the politics in the moment of January 6th. It's all they talk about. It consumes them. There's one defendant who's worried he's going to become radicalized because he's in that wing of the jail.
Well, it's true.
Now become radicalized. So whatever you heard in the 11th hour after the peak of the riot January 6th, you only can imagine what the talk is like now.
Yeah.
Is there triumphalism? Is there denialism? Is there defeatism?
It doesn't feel like it's gone away. I mean, it certainly feels like the people in there must be getting radicalized, but I feel like the rest of the country has shifted further into their direction. There's a lot more sympathy these days for everyone involved in January the 6th. It seems like despite the commission's really terrific work so far in exposing some things and confirming many of the things that many of us had reported before, but the country doesn't seem to be behind the move to go after these people. Certainly Democrats are, a huge part of the Democratic support in this country are in favor of it, but it doesn't seem like the whole country's still thinking about January 6th.
That, to me, is why this is the most fascinating story of our lifetimes, because this story has just begun. It's a transformative moment in our culture, in our politics, and in how we view each other in our communities. You ask, do people think it's a big deal? It's a real Rorschach test. I have no shortage of people, you two don't either, who probably say, everybody involved should be in prison for years. Everybody should be locked up for decades that was any part of this.
Right.
Then you have others saying this wasn't a crime, this was a peaceful protest, that the real insurrection was November 3rd and January 6th was a protest. You have that binary. You have that much of a divide. And January 6th has fueled a cultural and political change that began with Trump and has now infused it with a new momentum and energy.
Absolutely. And it speaks to how much propaganda is still going on. Go ahead, Joe.
And the fact that they call them tourists, right? So I think, again, as you say, this is really an historic moment. And I believe that these tapes, that this audio is historical record. In it, you can hear them already talking about well, Antifa was there, and it was Antifa that did the violence, and it was the BLM folks that did the violence. And if you look at the people walking through the rotunda, they looked like regular tourists. So now you start to wonder, where is it that they're getting the information from a political perspective? Like, how did that representative come to the conclusion that this was tourist? Did he hear this audio? Because what's very interesting is some of the people that are on this audio, I'll say this, historically, they were also involved with members of the Freedom Caucus. So we're talking about Paul Gosar. We're talking about Andy Biggs. Part of this audio also includes Paul Gosar's speech, because if you recall, when we talked about the precision and the timing of everything that went down, Paul Gosar was the one giving his speech when they had to recess the House because everybody had broken and breached the Capitol. So it was Paul Gosar literally giving the speech at the time. It's all coordinated.
It does all feel very coordinated, and it does just feel, as you point out, both of you point out, it is just a one episode of what seems to be a continuing episode to drain our democracy of its democracy. And I fear that the machinery that now was telling these people that what they were doing is legal and that they were right to go in and storm the Capitol and that they had a citizen's warrant or whatever it was to do so, that machinery has now gone well beyond just that group of people who are there at January the 6th, but is infecting everybody in the country to a very large extent. We've seen the move of these sheriffs, these sovereign sheriffs that are showing up everywhere. You know, the rule of law, the absolute principles in which this country is based on have been completely undermined. It feels to me like a propaganda machine. It feels to me like it's an information war machine that is both external in that it comes from maybe foreign countries like Russia, but it's also now internal, domestic, coming from any number of players internally.
You also have citizens who are only consuming curated information.
Right.
Information they want curated for them. I wouldn't doubt the people who think this was a peaceful tourist visit are only seeing the images Joe referenced. That one snippet of video where at one point the mob was between the velvet ropes in the rotunda. For one moment they were, and if that's all you see of it, if all you see is the group outside the Trump speech at the White House ellipse, you may think that. If I come up with some information that may be exculpatory for some of these defendants, that may evoke sympathy, or may make you think that they didn't do something quite so wrong, there are a number of people who don't want to hear that either. Who don't want to hear about anything sympathetic or exculpatory about a named defendant. So if people actively consume and seek out only curated information, they're perpetuating this propaganda themselves.
Absolutely. Any thoughts about the propaganda as well, Joe, from you?
Yeah, I think that's what led to, some of those people who were caught up in the moment. Like, how did they get so angry at Nancy Pelosi? I mean, I'm not angry at Nancy Pelosi. I've watched Fox News and I understand why they're angry at Nancy Pelosi, because everything she does is evil. I think when you start to demonize people, and like you said earlier about, a lot of Christians that are involved in this, you start talking about demons and really starting to demonize all of the Democrats, but looking to Nancy Pelosi as being sort of this, leader of a demonic sect, it's going to cause vitriol against her. And as you pointed out, Scott, about the misogyny, it all goes to the same point. Why is Biggs, I'm sorry, I forgot his name, but why is his feet up on her desk?
All right.
Why is that? He has
Barnett, yeah.
Big O, that's right, Big O. So why is his feet up on Nancy Pelosi's desk? I mean, come on, let's get real.
So rude. And yet there he is doing just that. So it's a scary time we live in the United States right now. And I wonder if you guys have any thoughts about how we move beyond this, because you, more than any, Scott, I think are covering a different side of the American population. But these insurrectionists are very different people. How do we bring them back into the fold? Can we bring them back in the fold?
First of all, I've developed an appreciation for how diverse this group actually is. You have people from all different demographies, from different socioeconomic statuses, from nearly every state in the nation. There's clusters from upstate New York to Southern California, from Florida to Illinois and Michigan. You have people from different professional backgrounds, blue collars and white collars, but all of them, to a degree, undergoing some form of radicalization. And I think it goes back to the point you made earlier. If we continue to consume exclusively information we want curated and sanitized that only aligns with our political perspectives, we're not going to progress. We're not going to reunify. Joe watches Fox News. I watch Fox News. I watch MSNBC, Newsmax, CNN. I'll consume any morsel of information I can find because I want to understand how all Americans are digesting news. Until we have a more unifying theory, we're not going to be unified.
this is so local. Like when we talked about, the Oath Keepers, it's local, right? Get into your counties. You talk about the sheriffs, it's local, get into your counties. This is about messaging. In terms of, I think two things need to happen. So conversations like this, where we're actually talking about facts, these are things that the government can prove. There's evidence for them. It's not rhetoric. It's simply what they can prove and what they have evidence of. All that information is in these documents. Secondly, we have to message properly. A lot of the things, as Scott mentioned about the demography of these folks, a lot of the things that the Democrats want to do are geared towards helping those people specifically. They really are trying to help every American and touch everyone on a local level. So the Democrats have to do a better job of messaging and how they're going about doing things. And I'll say this thirdly, we need to pass voting rights legislation. Mm-hmm. It is the most important thing that we have to do legislatively from this point forward.
That's not likely to happen, as you know. But you're right. It is absolutely important that we do that. I feel like we're at the point where both sides need to be giving in a little bit. Clearly America has given this a very clear message from both sides. But, it's not going to help us if we continue to stay a divided, polarized country. The past is probably not going to be recreated. There needs to be something new. And that something new requires everyone to give in a little bit and compromise. In this little rant for a lot lately, because I think it's so important. There's no ways these insurrectionists are coming over to the liberal side if nothing changes on the liberal side and vice versa. There's not going to be a one winner on this thing. It's going to have to be everybody meets somewhere in the middle. And I hope
I don't
these things work.
Understand why every American isn't to some degree obsessed with this, because there is a straight line between what happens with this prosecution and this investigation and January 6, 2025.
Oh, 100%.
Democracy,
100%.
The future of what happens in our country, it's being decided now. It's being influenced right now. This is the thing. Mm-hmm. This is the thing we need to fixate on. Anybody who cares about the future of the country, the future of our government, and our democratic system.
That's a really great point to end this on, Scott, because that's in fact why we've been doing so much reporting on January the 6th, as of course you have. But, this is just so instrumental and so pivotal to how we go forward. And it does go all the way to the top. I mean, we started the show saying the Oath Keepers with Roger Stone that morning. And then we found out, there they are on the mezzanine level of Capitol hours later. It's all connected. All these people are connected. It's one operation, and will absolutely determine what happens next time around in 25 when we have another inauguration, or should have another inauguration. Thank you both very much for being with us tonight on Narrative. Scott Macfarlane, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Tell everyone how they can find you on Twitter and elsewhere.
At Macfarlane News, we tweet the moment every development comes. And this is one of those stories with 700 criminal cases and a federal U.S. committee looking at it, where there's news every moment.
I cannot believe how good your feed is, by the way. It is a must-watch for anybody who's interested in anything that happened on that day. It's always got breaking news.
Mrs. Macfarlane would rather I put the phone down for a while. She's working on that, and we're trying to grow.
Well, I'm glad you're compromising too. That's good. It's good to see. But we're all thrilled that you are spending as much time as you can updating that feed as well. And Joe Dempsey, thanks very much for being here tonight. People can find you at Dempsey2, and terrific work as always in the research to help Narrative tell the story, and on your own feed where you provide lots of great threads. And there's one coming soon, which I know everyone's going to be excited about checking out. So with all that being said, thank you for being here tonight on Narrative. We'll be back tomorrow night with another interesting episode that swings off this one, because we're going to go talk about the Oath Keepers and one of the people who was able to infiltrate the Oath Keepers. The story of how they got in and what they found out. That'll be on tomorrow night's Narrative. So we hope you'll join us then. In the meantime, have a good night, everybody. Narrative is made possible by viewers like you. Join today and support truly independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative. That's patreon.com/narrative.